The evening air felt uncomfortably warm as Sarah set the table, carefully arranging the silverware with precision. Tonight was supposed to be special. It was a Friday night, a time when her family gathered together, when the mundane world outside faded away, and they could focus on what mattered most, each other. She had spent the afternoon in the kitchen, preparing a meal she hoped would impress, wanting everything to be perfect. But despite her efforts, tonight didn't feel right. There was a strange sense of unease tugging at her chest, like a dark cloud looming overhead. Perhaps it was the subtle distance she had begun to feel from Amir over the past few weeks. Her husband, once so attentive and present, had started withdrawing more and more, leaving Sarah to fill the empty spaces with unanswered questions. She tried to push the thoughts away, chalking it up to the stresses of life, work, school, and their children's activities. Life was busy. That was all it was, she reasoned. But deep down, she knew something was different. Amir hadn't been himself lately, and his mood had been erratic. At times, he seemed to be lost in his own thoughts, distracted. And when they did spend time together, there was a coldness in his eyes, something she had never noticed before. Sarah shook her head, trying to focus on the task at hand. The table was set, the candles lit, and everything was ready for a peaceful evening. She thought maybe the night would allow them to reconnect. They had been through rough patches before, but they always found their way back. Surely, tonight would be different. Her thoughts were interrupted when Amir walked into the room, his footsteps heavy but hurried. He looked at her, a quick, almost apologetic smile crossing his lips. "Dinner looks great," he said, though his voice lacked the usual enthusiasm. There was something about his tone that seemed forced, as though he were reading lines from a script, and Sarah couldn't ignore the sense of discomfort that seemed to radiate from him. "Thank you," Sarah replied, trying to meet his gaze, but he quickly turned away, busying himself with pouring a glass of water. The silence between them was thick, filled with the unsaid, the questions that neither of them dared ask aloud. Amir had never been the type to express his emotions openly, but tonight, his reticence felt different. It was as though he were a stranger in his own home. Sarah tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself it was just a passing phase. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that something wasn't right. Their two children, Lena and Yusuf, came bounding into the dining room, their laughter a welcome distraction. Sarah smiled, her heart warming at the sight of their innocent joy. Amir gave them a curt nod but didn't offer the usual affectionate greeting he often gave. His demeanor was distant, as though his mind were somewhere far away. The dinner began, and for a brief moment, the awkwardness seemed to fade. The kids chattered about their school day, and Sarah made small talk with Amir, hoping to bridge the gap between them. But no matter how much she tried, the distance remained. Amir seemed preoccupied, distracted, his thoughts elsewhere. Just as Sarah was about to ask him if everything was okay, the doorbell rang, cutting her off. She froze, looking at Amir. It was late for visitors. Who could it be at this hour? Amir quickly stood up, his face growing pale. "I'll get it," he said quickly, as if trying to avoid her gaze. His voice was strained, his movements hurried. It was unlike him to be so eager to leave the table. Sarah watched him disappear toward the door, her unease growing by the second. Her heart began to race, her thoughts spiraling. Who could be here? Why does he seem so agitated? She tried to brush off her concerns, but they grew louder with each passing second. A pit formed in her stomach as she listened to Amir's muffled voice at the door. "Amir?" The voice was unfamiliar, soft yet certain. It held a note of warmth, familiar warmth. A woman. Sarah felt a chill run through her body. Her instincts kicked in, and before she could stop herself, her feet carried her toward the door. She reached the hallway just as Amir opened the door wide. Standing in front of him was a woman. Sarah had never seen her before, but the sight of her was enough to stop Sarah in her tracks. The woman was young, no older than Sarah, but there was something about her that made Sarah's pulse quicken. The woman's face was calm, even serene, but it didn't stop the fear that surged in Sarah's chest. It was as if the room itself had grown still, frozen by the presence of this stranger. And then Sarah saw it, the woman's belly. She was pregnant. The room seemed to tilt, her vision narrowing as the shock hit her all at once. Pregnant? Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, her mind scrambling to make sense of the scene before her. Amir stepped aside, gesturing for the woman to enter. His face was unreadable, a mix of guilt and avoidance. But his eyes, those eyes that once always met hers with love and warmth, now refused to look at her. He was looking anywhere but at Sarah. The woman smiled politely as she stepped inside, her hands resting on her rounded belly. "Hello, Sarah," she said softly. Her voice was sweet, calm, but there was an underlying sharpness to it, a familiarity that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Amir didn't tell you, did he?" Sarah's throat tightened, her words caught in her chest. She could barely manage a whisper. Who are you?" The woman's smile didn't waver. "I'm Lena. And I'm expecting Amir's child." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She staggered back, her breath catching in her throat as her mind struggled to process what had just been said. "Amir's child?" The words echoed in her ears, over and over, until they felt like they were drowning her. She glanced at Amir, hoping, praying, that this was some kind of misunderstanding. But the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. There was no denial, no defense, just a hollow emptiness that shattered everything they had built together. Lena, the woman, stepped forward, her hand gently resting on her belly. "I've been seeing Amir for months now," she said, her voice almost too casual for the gravity of the situation. We're expecting a child together." The room seemed to collapse in on itself, the weight of her words settling heavily on Sarah's chest. Her entire world, the life she had worked so hard to build, felt like it was crumbling around her. The betrayal, the utter disregard for everything they had, was too much to bear. Sarah wanted to scream, to lash out, but the words wouldn't come. She could only stand there, numb, as Lena moved past her and into the living room. Amir followed, his face still avoiding hers. Sarah stood frozen for what felt like an eternity. The silence in the room was deafening. Her body shook, her hands trembling as she fought to hold herself together. "This isn't real. This can't be real." Finally, her voice broke through the haze of shock. "How could you do this to me?" Her words were raw, laden with hurt and disbelief. She turned to Amir, her heart breaking as she looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time in what felt like forever. Amir opened his mouth to speak, but his words faltered. "Sarah, Before he could finish, Lena spoke up, her voice filled with an unsettling calmness. "It's been a long day for everyone, don't you think? We should sit down and talk." Sarah's mind raced, her heart in turmoil. Sit down and talk. She could barely breathe, let alone sit down and have a conversation with the woman who had shattered her world. But despite the overwhelming pain, Sarah knew she had to stay. She had to understand. She had to know everything. The answers weren't here yet, but they would be. And so, with the weight of the betrayal hanging over her, she followed them into the living room, her heart heavy, her mind reeling with 1,000 questions. But most of all, she felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Because deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The beginning of a story that would change everything. The atmosphere in the living room was suffocating. Sarah sat across from Amir and the woman who, mere moments ago, had shattered her sense of reality. The table had been set for a peaceful family dinner, but now it was a battleground, one that felt more like a court of law, where every word could cut deeper than the last. Amir sat next to her, his back straight but his shoulders tense, as if he were bracing himself for something, though he wasn't looking at her. His eyes were locked on the ground, his hands fidgeting nervously in his lap. The woman, Lena, had settled in across from them, her pregnancy prominent and uncomfortable in its revelation. It felt as though time itself had stretched and warped in the few minutes since she had entered their home. The silence was unbearable. Sarah was acutely aware of her breath, her pulse racing in her ears. She wanted to say something, to scream, to ask why this had happened, why she was sitting here in this surreal nightmare. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she sat frozen, her gaze bouncing between Amir and Lena, both of whom seemed equally unmoved by the bombshell that had just been dropped. Lena adjusted herself in her seat, her smile too calm, too composed for the circumstances. It was as though she had been prepared for this moment, prepared for Sarah's shock, for the discomfort that now filled the air. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't even apologetic. Her posture remained open, almost proud, as if she expected to be accepted into this chaos with nothing but understanding. "You should have known," Lena said, her voice soft, almost reassuring. "Amir and we've been seeing each other for a while now." She looked at Amir, who flinched but remained silent. "It's not a secret anymore." Sarah's chest tightened at the words. She had always trusted Amir, trusted him to be her rock, her partner. But now, she was left with nothing but the bitter sting of betrayal. She had been right. The unease she had been feeling for weeks, the distance between them, the coldness in his touch, wasn't just her imagination. It was real. Amir had been hiding something from her. No, not just something, someone. Her eyes burned as she turned to Amir, her voice trembling. "You've been lying to me. To our children. You've been seeing her, behind my back." Amir didn't meet her gaze. His face remained ashen, his lips pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. His silence felt louder than anything he could have said. He had no defense, no excuse. There was nothing he could say to undo what had already been done. Lena, however, didn't seem affected by Sarah's hurt. She placed a hand gently on her stomach, as though to remind them both of the new life she carried. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. But you have to understand, Amir and we've been planning for this child. It's not something that just happened. It was carefully thought out." Sarah blinked, her thoughts scattered. Planning for what? A family behind my back? A secret life? Her voice grew louder, the hurt in her words almost unbearable. She wanted to cry, to let her anger explode, but she held herself back. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not yet. Amir finally spoke, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Sarah, You don't get to explain yourself right now." Sarah snapped, cutting him off. "Not after everything. You think you can just waltz in here, bring her into my home, and pretend everything is okay?" Lena's smile faltered for just a second, but then she straightened up, her expression hardening. "Look, I didn't come here to make things worse. I just wanted you to know. The truth was bound to come out eventually." Sarah shook her head, her eyes welling up with tears that she fought desperately to hold back. "You think telling me this is somehow going to make it better? That I'll just accept you into my life because you've brought a child into this world? Is that it?" Lena met her gaze, unflinching. "No. But I think you should consider the situation more carefully. Amir is the father of my child, and that changes things. For all of us." The words hit Sarah like a slap to the face. She looked at Amir, disbelief and anger warring within her. He was sitting there, silent, as though the weight of the betrayal were too much for him to bear. He had nothing to say. No apology. Nothing. Sarah could feel her heart breaking in real time, the cracks forming beneath the surface. She had spent so many years believing that her marriage was solid, that Amir was her rock, the one person she could always count on. But now, she saw him for what he truly was, a man who had lied to her, who had built an entirely separate life without her knowledge. For a moment, the room seemed to stretch out into eternity. The ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound that broke the silence. Amir's head remained bowed, and Lena's hands rested calmly in her lap. Sarah's mind raced. What now? She couldn't just walk away from this, she couldn't pretend it didn't happen. Her family, her life, everything was crumbling before her eyes. The pieces of her once perfect world were falling apart, and she didn't know how to stop them. Lena's voice cut through the fog of her thoughts. I don't expect you to like me, Sarah. But I do think we should all sit down and discuss what happens next. For the sake of the child. Sarah's stomach churned. She could feel the bitterness rising in her throat. You want to talk about the child now? After everything? After you've turned my world upside down? Amir shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely audible. Sarah. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for this to happen. Sarah's eyes narrowed, disbelief in her gaze. You didn't want to hurt me? Then why did you do it, Amir? Why did you cheat? Why bring this woman into our lives like it was nothing? You didn't care about me. You didn't care about our family. The words stung as they left her lips, but she didn't care. It felt as though she had been living in a lie for so long, and now, the truth was spilling out like poison. Lena shifted again, her hand still on her belly, her gaze unwavering. I think it's important that we all face the truth. The reality is that Amir and I are having a child, and that's not something that can be undone. We all need to figure out how we're going to move forward from this. Sarah's mind was racing. How could she possibly move forward? How could she live with the knowledge that her husband had betrayed her, that this woman, who was now carrying his child, had been a part of her life for months without her knowing? I don't know what you expect from me, Sarah said, her voice shaking with anger and disbelief. But I can't just sit here and accept this. You've destroyed everything. Lena's gaze softened, but only slightly. I understand you're upset. I'm not trying to take Amir away from you. But things have changed now. We all have to come to terms with that. Amir looked up then, his eyes finally meeting hers. There was a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, but it was fleeting, gone before Sarah could fully grasp it. Sarah. I never wanted this. I made a mistake. A huge one. But I'm asking you to try and understand. I'm asking you to try and forgive me. Sarah shook her head, her hands trembling at her sides. Forgive you? After everything? Lena spoke again, her voice even. This isn't about forgiveness right now. It's about figuring out what comes next. Sarah felt a rush of emotions, betrayal, anger, grief, all blending together. She couldn't stand the sight of Amir anymore, nor could she look at Lena, whose calm demeanor made Sarah feel like she was in some sort of twisted reality. Everything she thought she knew about her life, about her family, had been turned upside down. The life she had once cherished was gone, replaced by this fractured, impossible truth. But there was one thing Sarah knew for sure, nothing was going to be the same. Nothing could ever go back to the way it was. The days following the revelation felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Sarah had never imagined that something so earth-shattering could happen to her, not to them. She kept telling herself that she was in a dream, that surely, this couldn't be real. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself, the truth lingered like a dark shadow, chasing her every step. The house that had once been filled with laughter, love, and the sounds of her children running through the hallways now felt eerily silent. The once welcoming atmosphere was replaced with a heaviness that hung in the air, suffocating everyone in it. Amir still lived there, but it was as if he was a ghost in his own home, physically present, but emotionally absent. Sarah couldn't escape the sight of him. Every room she entered, every corner of the house seemed to be haunted by his presence. His absence was even more pronounced in the moments when he wasn't around, leaving an empty space that she couldn't fill. The kids didn't fully understand what was going on. Lena had been introduced as someone important in their father's life, but Sarah had managed to shield them from the reality of what had transpired. She couldn't bear the thought of telling them that their father, the man they had always looked up to, had betrayed her in the most unimaginable way. The kids were young, too innocent to grasp the weight of the situation, but that didn't make it any easier for Sarah. Each night, after the children were tucked into bed, Sarah would sit in the dark, staring at the empty space where Amir had once been. She would replay every moment, the dinner, the words, the look in his eyes. She couldn't understand how it had all come to this. How had their love, which once seemed so strong, been shattered so easily? Amir had apologized, over and over, but his words were like a broken record, falling on deaf ears. He begged for her forgiveness, for another chance, for things to go back to normal. But how could they? How could they ever go back to the way things were when everything had been torn apart? Every time she looked at him, she saw the face of a man who had betrayed her, someone she no longer recognized. And then there was Lena. She didn't help matters, not one bit. Lena's presence in their home felt like an intrusion. Though she claimed to want nothing more than peace, her actions spoke differently. She would call Amir often, sometimes late at night, her voice lilting in the background. It was as if she wanted to make her mark on their lives, a constant reminder of what had transpired. Sarah couldn't avoid it anymore. She was being forced to confront the woman who carried Amir's child, the woman who would forever be tied to their family, whether she liked it or not. The tension between Sarah and Amir had only deepened. They had barely spoken in the days that followed the revelation. Every time they were in the same room, it felt like a wall had been erected between them, a wall that neither of them could tear down. It was a Sunday evening when the argument began. The children were at a friend's house for the night, leaving Sarah and Amir alone in the house. Sarah had been trying to focus on her work, trying to keep her mind busy and distracted, but it was impossible. Amir had been acting strange again, distant, withdrawn. He hadn't touched her in weeks, and when he did speak to her, his words were laced with guilt and sorrow. That evening, as they sat in the living room, the silence was deafening. Amir was staring at the television, though he wasn't really watching it. His fingers drummed absent-mindedly on the arm of the couch, and Sarah could see the tension in his posture. "Amir," Sarah said, her voice low but firm. "We need to talk." He looked at her for the first time in days, his eyes tired, dark circles underneath. There was a moment of hesitation before he sighed deeply and set the remote down. "I know," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know we need to talk." Sarah's heart beat erratically in her chest as she gathered the courage to continue. "I don't know what you expect from me anymore, Amir. You've destroyed everything. You've broken my trust, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." His face twisted with guilt, but Sarah couldn't find it in herself to feel sympathy. How could she? She had been betrayed by the one person she thought would never hurt her. "I'm sorry," Amir muttered, his voice barely audible. "I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Please, believe me." Sarah laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You didn't mean for this to happen? Then what was it, Amir? A mistake? A little affair? A few stolen moments?" She let out a shaky breath. "This isn't just some mistake. You've been seeing her for months, and now she's carrying your child. How am I supposed to just accept that?" Amir opened his mouth to respond, but Sarah cut him off. "No, don't say anything. I've heard it all before." She stood up from the couch and walked toward the window, her hands gripping the edge of the sill as she stared out into the night. "I don't even recognize you anymore. The man I married, the man I thought I knew, he's gone. And all that's left is this stranger who betrayed me. And for what? For a child with her? The words stung as they left her lips, but they felt necessary. She needed to say them. She needed to get it all out before she exploded. Amir's voice was soft but filled with anguish. "Sarah, I never meant for any of this to happen. I was weak. I thought I could keep things separated, keep you in one part of my life and her in another. But I realize now that I was wrong. I was a coward. I never should have lied to you." Sarah's fists clenched as she turned to face him. "And now what, Amir? What do you want from me? Do you want me to forgive you? To pretend that everything is okay? Because I can't do that. I can't just move on from this. I can't just forget what you've done." Amir stood up, his eyes pleading with her. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know I've hurt you more than I can ever explain. But I'm asking for a chance, Sarah. A chance to fix this. A chance to prove to you that I'm not the man I was when I made that mistake." Sarah's heart ached at his words, but the pain she felt was too fresh, too raw. She shook her head, stepping back. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Amir. How do I know you won't do this again? How do I know you won't run back to her the moment things get hard? Because I can't live like that. I can't live in constant fear of you betraying me again. I swear to you, I won't," Amir said desperately. "I swear on everything I have. I love you, Sarah. I love you, and I'm not leaving. I don't want to be with her. I want to be with you. Please, give me a chance." Sarah closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of the situation. She could feel the pull of her emotions, the part of her that wanted to believe Amir, that wanted to forgive him, but another part of her, a much stronger part, screamed to walk away, to leave him and never look back. "You don't get it, do you?" she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not about just forgiving you. It's about me. I have to live with this. I have to carry this pain every day. You've shattered everything, Amir. And I don't know if I can ever pick up the pieces." Amir was silent, the weight of her words settling between them like a chasm. Sarah turned away, her heart pounding. She needed space. She needed to think. She couldn't keep living like this, not in this house, not with this man, not knowing that the future she had planned had been stolen from her in one reckless decision. The tears she had been holding back finally fell, silent and steady, as she walked out of the room. The door to the bedroom closed softly behind her, and she collapsed onto the bed, burying her face in the pillow. The tears flowed freely now, no longer held back by anger or confusion. She just let herself cry, letting the weight of the betrayal and the pain of it all wash over her. The future, once so clear and bright, had been shattered, and she wasn't sure how she would ever put the pieces back together again. It had been a week since the argument, a week since the night that had irreversibly shifted the trajectory of their lives. The house, once a sanctuary of warmth and laughter, had transformed into a silent battlefield. Every room felt foreign now, every corner haunted by the echoes of what had been and what could never be again. Sarah walked through the empty hallways, her footsteps barely making a sound against the wooden floors. The kids were at school, and Amir had left for work early, though she had no idea when he'd be back. She hadn't seen him much since the confrontation. It wasn't that she was avoiding him, though in many ways, she was, but the rift between them was too wide to bridge with mere words. The reality of her situation sat heavy on her chest. She was drowning in a sea of confusion, uncertainty, and unbearable pain. She had been married to Amir for nearly 12 years. They had built a life together, shared dreams, aspirations, and a family. But now, all of it felt like an illusion. The betrayal had shattered her belief in everything they had built, and she didn't know how to put the pieces back together. She couldn't pretend that things would go back to normal, that she could simply forgive him and continue on as if nothing had happened. Forgiveness wasn't just a word, it was a process, a journey. And right now, she wasn't sure if she could even begin that journey with Amir. In the stillness of the house, Sarah felt the weight of every decision she had to make. Should she try to salvage her marriage? Could she ever trust Amir again, knowing that his lies had spanned months, if not longer? Or was it time to let go, to walk away from the man she thought she knew and start anew? The thought of separation scared her more than anything, but the thought of continuing in a marriage built on deception was just as terrifying. The children were her anchor, though. They were the reason she hadn't made any drastic decisions yet. Her love for them was unconditional, and she couldn't bear the thought of breaking up their family. But how could she stay in a home filled with so much pain? How could she continue to play the role of a happy wife when everything inside her felt like it was crumbling? Sarah sank down onto the couch, her hands trembling as she looked around the room. It used to be so familiar, so comforting. But now, it felt like a prison. The memories that had once brought her joy now only served as painful reminders of what had been lost. Amir's struggle. Amir, for his part, was caught in his own hell. He had spent the last week attempting to right his wrongs, but the weight of his actions felt unbearable. He knew he had betrayed Sarah in the worst way possible. He had broken the vows they had made to each other, and now, there was no easy way to fix what he had done. Every day, he woke up with a heavy heart, weighed down by guilt and regret. He missed Sarah, the woman who had been his partner, his best friend, the mother of his children. He missed the way she used to laugh, the way they used to talk about their day, the way they shared their dreams. All of that was gone now. He had destroyed it. Lena's presence, though, was a constant reminder of his mistake. The child she carried was his responsibility, a product of his failure as a husband. He couldn't ignore the fact that he was going to be a father again, but this time, the circumstances were entirely different. The child he would have with Lena wasn't born out of love, it was born out of his own selfishness and poor choices. Amir had tried to reach out to Sarah, tried to apologize, but she had shut him out. He understood why. How could she forgive him so easily? How could she just accept him back after everything he had done? He had tried to talk to her, but the conversations always ended in tears and silence. He knew he had no right to ask for her forgiveness, not now, not so soon. But he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. He loved Sarah. He always had. But now, he was terrified that his mistakes were going to cost him the most important person in his life. The visit to the mosque. In his desperation, Amir turned to the one place that had always given him comfort, his faith. He hadn't been to the mosque in months, not since his affair with Lena had begun. The guilt had kept him away, and the shame of his actions made him feel unworthy of seeking spiritual guidance. But now, with everything in his life unraveling, he knew he needed to go. He needed answers. The call to prayer echoed in the distance as Amir walked into the mosque, the familiar sounds of the prayer hall bringing him a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in weeks. He took a seat near the back, bowing his head in prayer. His hands trembled as he recited the words, and the weight of his sins pressed down on him with every syllable. After the prayer, Amir sat quietly in the mosque, reflecting on his life, his mistakes, and the pain he had caused. He knew he couldn't undo what had been done, but he prayed for guidance. He prayed for the strength to be the man he should have been all along. And most of all, he prayed for forgiveness, for Sarah, for his children, and for himself. The Imam came over to him, sensing Amir's inner turmoil. "Amir, my son," he said gently, "I can see that you are troubled. What is it that weighs so heavily on your heart?" Amir hesitated before speaking. "I've made a terrible mistake, Imam. I've hurt the woman I love. I've betrayed her, and I don't know if I can make it right." The Imam nodded, his expression understanding. "We are all fallible, Amir. But it is in seeking forgiveness, both from Allah and from those we have wronged, that we find our redemption. You must face the consequences of your actions, but do not lose hope. Allah is merciful, and through repentance, we can seek to make amends." Amir's heart stirred with a mixture of hope and guilt. He knew the road to redemption wouldn't be easy. He knew it would take time, patience, and effort. But for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of something other than despair, a glimmer of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could make things right. The decision. As the days passed, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. She couldn't continue living like this, torn between her love for Amir and the deep pain his betrayal had caused. She had tried to push her emotions aside, to focus on her children, but the strain was too much. She could no longer ignore the cracks that had appeared in her marriage. One afternoon, after the children had come home from school, Sarah sat down with them in the living room. They were playing with their toys, laughing and chatting, completely unaware of the turmoil that had been consuming their mother's heart. Sarah watched them for a moment, and something inside her shifted. She knew she had to make a choice, not just for herself, but for them too. Her children needed her. They needed stability. They needed a mother who was strong, who could show them the way forward in times of hardship. She thought about Amir and the pain he had caused her. She thought about the years of love and commitment they had shared. But she also thought about the future she wanted to build for herself and her children. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Sarah and Amir sat down to talk. It was the first time in days that they had spoken to each other with any real depth. "I've been thinking a lot," Sarah said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Amir. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did. But I also can't keep living in this limbo. I need to make a decision." Amir looked at her, his heart aching with the weight of her words. He had known this moment would come, but he wasn't prepared for the pain it brought. "What are you saying, Sarah?" Sarah took a deep breath, her heart heavy. "I don't know yet. I'm not ready to make a final decision, but I need time. Time to think, time to heal, time to figure out what comes next." Amir nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "Take all the time you need, Sarah. I'll wait. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Sarah's heart clenched, but she knew this was the right decision. She needed space. She needed time to heal, to rebuild her trust in herself before she could even begin to think about rebuilding her relationship with Amir. For the first time in days, Sarah felt a sense of clarity. The road ahead was uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure: she would take it one step at a time. A new beginning. The days that followed Sarah's decision to take time to think were filled with turmoil. On the outside, she tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the sake of her children. She still had to manage their school routines, help with homework, cook dinner, and all the usual responsibilities that came with being a mother. But inside, everything was different. The world she had once known felt like it had been torn apart, and she was left with the scattered pieces, unsure of how to fit them back together. The pain she felt wasn't just about the betrayal itself. It was the emotional aftermath, the years of trust that had been built, only to be crushed under the weight of Amir's actions. It was the uncertainty about the future, the fear of losing everything she had worked for, and the fear of how her children would be affected. The weight of it all felt unbearable at times, and Sarah found herself retreating into her own mind more often than not, lost in a world of questions, doubts, and heartache. She knew she couldn't continue like this forever. The emotional exhaustion was taking its toll. Her once bright eyes now looked tired, and her smile, when it did appear, was forced. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed or felt genuine joy. It was as if she had forgotten how to be happy. But one thing was certain: Sarah was determined to find a way forward. She couldn't stay stuck in this pain. She couldn't live in this endless cycle of bitterness and resentment. She had children who needed her, and even if she had lost herself for a time, she needed to find a way back to the person she had been before Amir's betrayal had shattered her world. The weight of forgiveness. Forgiveness wasn't a simple thing. It wasn't a switch that could be flipped or a magic word that could instantly heal the wounds that Amir's betrayal had caused. Forgiveness, Sarah realized, was something much deeper. It wasn't just about letting go of the anger she felt toward Amir, though that was part of it. It was about letting go of the hurt that had taken root in her heart, and learning to release the emotional weight that had been dragging her down. But forgiveness also meant confronting her own feelings of inadequacy. Was she not enough? Had she failed as a wife, as a partner? The questions haunted her. She wasn't sure if she would ever fully have answers to them, but she had to learn to make peace with the fact that some things in life were beyond her control. She couldn't change Amir's actions. She couldn't undo the past. What she could do, however, was choose how to move forward. At first, the idea of forgiveness seemed impossible. How could she forgive Amir for something so profound, something that had torn their entire life apart? But as the days passed and she spent more time reflecting, Sarah began to realize that forgiveness wasn't for Amir, it was for her. Holding on to the anger, the resentment, and the pain would only continue to weigh her down. It was as if the burden of Amir's actions had become her own, and it was time to let it go. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It didn't mean pretending that nothing had happened. It didn't mean excusing Amir's actions or making him feel that what he had done was okay. Forgiveness, Sarah understood, was a personal journey. It was about finding peace within herself, about releasing the emotional hold that Amir's betrayal had on her, so that she could move forward, whether that meant staying with him or not. Sarah didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she would ever trust Amir again, or if their marriage could ever be healed. But one thing was clear, she had to stop allowing the past to control her. If she stayed in this place of pain and anger, she would only continue to suffer. And that, she realized, wasn't fair to her children or to herself. The role of family and faith. As Sarah began her journey toward healing, she found solace in her family and faith. Her mother, who had always been a source of wisdom and strength, was there for her through every step. Sarah's mother never judged her, never told her what she should do. Instead, she listened. She allowed Sarah to speak her truth, to vent her frustrations, and to cry when the weight of it all became too much. And in return, Sarah felt comforted, not by advice, but by the simple act of being heard. Her mother had gone through her own hardships in her marriage, and though Sarah never imagined her mother would have ever faced such a painful situation, the older woman had words of encouragement and insight. "You are strong, Sarah. You are so much stronger than you realize. What has happened to you is not your fault. And if you choose to forgive Amir, know that it is your decision alone, not something that anyone can force you into. Your heart will tell you when it is time, and until then, you must focus on your own well-being." Her mother's words were a balm to Sarah's wounded soul. She realized that, in many ways, her own healing was just as important as the decisions she would make about Amir. And when she reflected on her children, her role as their mother, Sarah knew that she needed to be strong, for them. They didn't need to see their mother unraveling, consumed by pain and bitterness. They needed to see her rise above the hurt, to find a way forward that would show them how to handle the challenges life would inevitably throw their way. Her faith was another pillar that supported her through the turmoil. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and the weight of everything pressed down on her chest, Sarah would find solace in prayer. She would speak to Allah, asking for guidance, for the strength to endure, and for the wisdom to know what path to take. Prayer became a refuge for her, a place where she could pour out her feelings without fear of judgment. In those moments, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't experienced in months. She began to understand that, though the pain would never fully go away, she didn't have to carry it alone. Allah was there, listening, offering comfort when it seemed that everything else was falling apart. And, in time, Sarah began to feel a shift. Slowly, she started to regain a sense of self, of inner strength that she had long forgotten. She realized that she wasn't defined by what had happened to her. She wasn't just the wife who had been betrayed. She was Sarah, someone who had endured, someone who was learning to heal, and someone who was determined to move forward, no matter what. A moment of truth. It had been 2 months since the night of the confrontation. 2 months of silence, reflection, and healing. During that time, Sarah had spoken to Amir on several occasions, but their conversations had been limited to the necessary discussions about the children, household matters, and logistics. Neither of them was ready to talk about their relationship, not yet. But now, Sarah knew it was time. She couldn't keep living in this emotional limbo, unsure of what was to come. She needed closure, whether it meant moving forward with Amir or parting ways for good. It was time to face the truth. One evening, after dinner, Sarah called Amir into the living room. He walked in hesitantly, his eyes filled with uncertainty. He had been patient with her, giving her the space she had asked for, but he was no closer to knowing what would happen. Would Sarah forgive him? Would she ever truly heal? Would their marriage survive? Sarah, Amir said softly, sitting down across from her. I know this has been hard for you. For both of us. And I know that you've been taking time to think. I just want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll respect it. I love you, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. Sarah looked at him, her heart heavy. It wasn't easy to say what she was about to say. Amir, I've been doing a lot of thinking. And I realize that forgiveness isn't just about what you did. It's also about me. I've been holding on to so much pain, and I've been letting it define me. But I can't do that anymore. I need to let go. I need to forgive, not for you, but for me. Tears welled up in Amir's eyes, and he nodded silently, understanding the weight of her words. This was not a simple, I forgive you, nor was it a guarantee that everything would be okay. But it was a step forward. It was a chance for both of them to heal, for their marriage to either begin anew or for them to walk separate paths. Sarah paused, then added softly, I don't know what the future holds, Amir. But I do know that I'm taking this one day at a time. And that's all I can promise right now. Amir swallowed hard, the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. I understand, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'll wait, Sarah. I'll do whatever it takes. And so, the journey continued. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, Sarah was no longer going to let the past dictate her future. She had taken the first step toward healing, and now, with faith in herself and a heart that was learning to forgive, she could face whatever was to come. A shattered foundation. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but for Sarah, the weight of the past still hovered over her every action. Though she had made the decision to forgive Amir, the real journey, of rebuilding trust and navigating the waters of a wounded relationship, had only just begun. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't the end of the process but a mere beginning. She had allowed herself to feel the first flicker of peace in her heart, but the ache of betrayal still lingered, like a scar that would never fully fade. Amir, too, struggled. He knew that Sarah's forgiveness didn't mean everything was okay. He knew that she wasn't the same woman she had been before his betrayal. The trust they once shared had been shattered, and he didn't expect it to be repaired overnight. His guilt weighed on him every day, and the longing to make things right for Sarah and their children consumed him. But even with his deep remorse, he couldn't escape the feeling that he was walking on eggshells, uncertain if Sarah's forgiveness would be enough to heal their broken bond. Amir had become a different man. He was more attentive, more present, and more willing to listen. He sought out advice, read self-help books on relationships, and attended counseling to learn how to become the man Sarah deserved. But he understood, deep down, that no amount of effort could erase the past. What he was doing now, what he had always wanted to do, was not enough to make up for the deep pain he had caused. Amir had apologized countless times, but Sarah knew that apologies could only go so far. It was the actions that mattered, the consistency of change, and the willingness to put in the work, day in and day out, to prove that he was truly committed to making amends. But the question remained, could she trust him again? Could she open her heart to him without fearing another betrayal? It wasn't just about forgiveness anymore. It was about healing, and healing, Sarah knew, was not a linear path. The weight of parental responsibility. The responsibility of parenthood weighed heavily on Sarah's heart. She had always prided herself on being a mother who could shield her children from the adult complexities of life. But the past few months had made it impossible to hide the strain in her marriage. Her children had noticed the tension, the silences between her and Amir, the subtle shift in the atmosphere at home. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but they could sense that something was wrong. They could feel the heaviness in the air when they sat down to dinner together, the unspoken words that hung between their parents. Her oldest son, Omar, had been particularly sensitive. At 13, he was old enough to notice when things weren't right. He had asked Sarah why Amir wasn't as affectionate toward her as he used to be. His innocent question had hit Sarah harder than she could have imagined. She had tried to reassure him, telling him that everything was fine, but the truth was, nothing felt fine. The cracks in their marriage were visible, and though she did her best to shield her children from the turmoil, she knew they could feel the tension. It was in these moments, looking at her children, that Sarah realized the gravity of her decisions. She was not just navigating her own pain and forgiveness, she was also guiding her children through a storm they didn't fully understand. Their emotional well-being depended on the choices she made now. She had always wanted to protect them, to give them a happy, stable home. And though the circumstances had changed, she still had the power to shape the future of their family. But what kind of future would that be? The healing process. One evening, as Sarah sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky with hues of orange and pink, she thought about the life she had built. There was a time when everything felt perfect, when she and Amir had been two halves of a whole. Their dreams had aligned, and their love had been a guiding force in their lives. But now, all of that felt distant. The once vibrant picture of their life together had become a shadow of its former self, and Sarah wasn't sure if she could restore it to its original beauty. It was in these quiet moments of reflection that Sarah realized she needed something more. Forgiveness was not a one-time decision. It was an ongoing process that required time, patience, and effort, not just from Amir, but from herself as well. She had been so focused on the pain, the betrayal, and the hurt, that she had neglected her own healing. Sarah decided to take some time for herself, away from the chaos of family life. She called up her sister, Maya, and made plans for a weekend retreat, a few days at a secluded cabin in the mountains. It wasn't just about escaping, it was about rediscovering herself, her strength, and her sense of peace. She needed to reconnect with the woman she had been before her world had been shattered. Maya, who had always been her confidant, was supportive of the idea. She understood that Sarah needed space to reflect and recharge. "You've been carrying so much on your shoulders, Sarah. It's time you take a step back and focus on yourself for a while," Maya had said. The silent struggles of Amir. Meanwhile, Amir was struggling in his own right. As he dropped the kids off at school one morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. His family, once so whole, now felt fragmented. Despite his efforts to change, despite his apologies and the countless conversations he had with Sarah, there was still a wall between them that he couldn't breach. Amir had been patient, understanding, and kind, but nothing seemed to be enough to repair the damage he had caused. His guilt had become a constant companion, and every time he looked at Sarah, he saw the woman she used to be, before he had broken her heart. The weight of that regret, of knowing that he could never fully undo the past, was suffocating. His own journey of self-improvement had brought him closer to his faith, and he found comfort in seeking guidance from his imam. "What if she can never trust me again?" Amir had asked during one of their discussions. "What if my mistakes are too big to forgive?" The imam had responded with wisdom, "We are all imperfect, Amir. We all make mistakes, but it is in acknowledging those mistakes, in seeking redemption, and in working to become better that we find Allah's mercy. But remember, trust must be earned, and forgiveness is not something you can demand. You must be patient, and you must give Sarah the space she needs. Amir had taken the Imam's words to heart, but it did little to alleviate the turmoil within him. He knew that Sarah's heart was still closed to him, and he couldn't force her to open it. All he could do was continue to prove, through his actions, that he was committed to being the man she needed. A weekend of reflection. The weekend retreat that Sarah had planned was a turning point for her. Away from the constant reminders of the life she had shared with Amir, she found a sense of peace that had eluded her for months. The mountains, with their vast expanse and serene beauty, allowed her to reconnect with herself. She spent her days journaling, walking along forest trails, and reflecting on her life. She had always been someone who loved the stillness of nature, and now, more than ever, it was the perfect place for her to center herself. On the second night of her retreat, as she sat by a crackling fire, Sarah thought deeply about her life, her choices, and the future. She realized that forgiveness was a gift she was giving herself, not just Amir. It was a way of releasing the grip the past had on her. But she also understood that forgiveness didn't mean that things would automatically go back to the way they were. Things had changed, and the trust that had once defined her relationship with Amir would take time to rebuild. She realized that she couldn't make decisions based on fear or guilt. She couldn't allow the weight of what had happened to dictate her future. She had to make a decision that was true to her heart, one that would honor her own emotional well-being and the well-being of her children. When she returned home, she was more at peace with herself. Her mind was clearer, and though the challenges in her marriage still remained, she felt stronger. It was time to face Amir again, to have a conversation that would shape the future of their relationship. The conversation that changed everything. On the evening Sarah returned, Amir was waiting for her in the living room. He had been nervous, unsure of what kind of reception he would receive. His heart raced as Sarah walked through the door, her eyes tired but her posture straighter, as if she had found something she had been missing. She sat down beside him, her gaze steady. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with years of unspoken words and unresolved emotions. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't suffocating. It wasn't full of anger or resentment. It was simply a moment of stillness, where both of them could finally listen to their own hearts. "I've been thinking a lot," Sarah began, her voice calm but resolute. "And I've come to realize something important. Forgiveness isn't something that can be rushed. It isn't something that happens overnight. It's a process, and I need to take it one day at a time." Amir nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I'm willing to wait, Sarah. I'll do whatever it takes." "I know," Sarah said softly. "But the truth is, I can't move forward if we're constantly looking back. If I'm going to heal, we both need to make a choice. And that choice is whether we're going to rebuild together, slowly, carefully, with trust and honesty, or if we need to walk separate paths." Her words hung in the air, the weight of them both an invitation and a challenge. It was a moment of truth, one that would ultimately determine the future of their marriage. But Sarah knew that, no matter what, she had come to a place of peace within herself. Whatever the future held, she was ready to face it.